I have a super fun instrument. It has a crazy name. It's a high-performance liquid chromatography inductively coupled plasma triple quadruple mass spec.
There has to be an acronym.
Yeah, but it's not much better. It's an HPLC ICP QQQMS.
From the heart of The Ohio State University on the Oval, this is Voices of Excellence from the College of Arts and Sciences, with your host, David Staley. Voices focuses on the innovative work of arts and sciences faculty and staff, with departments as wide-ranging as art, astronomy, chemistry and biochemistry, physics, emergent materials, and mathematics and languages, among many others. The college always has something exciting happening. Join us to find out what's new now.
This afternoon, I'm joined by Melisa Diaz, assistant professor in earth sciences and the principal investigator of the Polar and Environmental Geochemistry Lab at the Ohio State University College of the Arts and Sciences. Her research interests are centered around the applications of geochemical techniques toward understanding physical systems and how biology and society interact with them. Her primary research focus is the cryosphere, mainly the Antarctic and the Arctic, specifically Greenland, where she studies the transport, cycling, and alteration of salts, nutrients, and atmospherically derived constituents. She also studies the intersection of urban geochemistry with environmental justice, social equity, and knowledge co-productions. She was recently named a CIFAR Azrieli Global Scholar, the first Ohio State scholar and one of only 12 researchers selected this year for this prestigious honor, which supports the next generation of research leaders tackling global challenges. Congratulations, and welcome, Dr. Diaz, to Voices.
Thanks.
And I want to start first with the CIFAR Azrieli Global Scholars Program. First of all, tell us what this program is.
Sure. So CIFAR is the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And so while it is a Canadian-based organization, it attracts scholars from all over the globe. And they have a number of research programs, and then they have this grant, really, that supports scholars from across the globe. And so the Azrieli Global Scholars started with an endowment with funds from the Azrieli family. And so they put out this announcement every year, and they attract fellows from a variety of different programs. Not all of them recruit each year. And so this fellowship, it funds me for the next 2 years. It comes with $50,000 to use for personal development and research. And it also allows me to join a program through CIFAR to work with the fellows in that program. I have the opportunity to propose small research grants and projects. So we actually have one that was recently selected, and we have another one that's pending. Yeah, it's a really great training opportunity, and it allows me to reach scientists that I normally wouldn't reach in the U.S.
Well, so that was my next question. Are all the fellows scientists? Are they all geochemists?
It depends on the program. So I'm in one called Earth 4D, Subsurface Exploration. And so it's thinking about the 4 dimensions of Earth. Obviously, we think about 3D systems, but adding time as a 4th dimension. And so thinking about our planet not only as its spherical, holistic unit that we see it now, but considering its 4 billion years of history. And so my program is very science-focused, and there are a number of geochemists, but there are also physicists and microbiologists that are in that program as well. It's actually the only earth science-focused program through CIFAR right now.
And you say time as sort of the 4th dimension. Backward in time, are you looking ahead at all?
Sure, yeah.
How far ahead? Not 4 billion years ahead.
As long as our models predict something that seems accurate, we have folks that are making predictive models just a few short years into the future, but then folks that are thinking about how Earth might change in the next 100, 200, 300 years. Most of it, though, is a little bit back looking.
Well, I want to talk about the work of your lab. And I know you use geochemical tools to explore polar, urban systems. Let's start first with what's meant by geochemistry in this context. I know what the geo is, I know what chemistry is. What's geochemistry?
I like to think about it as looking at the chemistry of the environment. And so we have chemistry that most of us have taken either in high school or in college, but geochemistry really takes those foundations of chemistry and applies it specifically to Earth. So if we're looking at soils or water or the atmosphere, what are the chemicals, what are the constituents of those different landscape units?
How is it that you, as a researcher, are able to study such very different environments?
With a lot of practice and some skill and definitely luck.
Luck.
Luck, yes. So we are analytical focused in my lab. So we acquire instruments, we collect samples in the field, and then we process them either in the field or back here at Ohio State. And those instruments, sometimes they're better suited for water, sometimes they're better suited for soil, and it's really just finding the right applications for our different samples. We're really driven by questions. So what kind of questions are we looking to answer in the environment?
What are some of those questions?
Oh, that's a hard question. How are nutrients moving through icy environments? How can ice overlaying water trap and reflect the chemistry of the water beneath it? Do you actually have to get through ice to understand processes at the seafloor? How are historical practices in urban environments influencing resilience of people today? So these are sort of some of the broad questions that we're generally trying to answer in my lab.
You mentioned instruments that you used. Tell us about some of these instruments.
Sure. So I have right now an ion chromatograph. So it looks at dissolved ions in samples. So those are elements that have either a positive or a negative charge. Mm-hmm. I recently received an award from the college to acquire an X-ray fluorescence instrument. So what that does is it shines basically light on your samples, puts energy in, and then those elements fluoresce in your samples, and it tells us about the bulk composition. So how much iron or silica or aluminum is in a solid sample. I have a super fun instrument. It has a crazy name. It's a high-performance liquid chromatography inductively coupled plasma triple quadruple mass spec.
There has to be an acronym.
Yeah, but it's not much better. It's an HPLC ICP QQQMS. It's not much better. But that instrument's really cool. And so basically what it does is it uses a column that's filled with a certain type of material or a resin. And it separates out the different compounds in a liquid sample. And so let's say it's something like a size exclusion column. What that means is it has a resin that separates different molecules based off of their size. So it's a retention then, right? So the things that are smaller move through quicker, the things that are bigger move through with more time. And so then this quadrupole uses a series of magnets to actually then further chemically separate. And then we have a detector at the end, this mass spec, that looks at the bulk elemental composition of those specific elements. So that was probably a little bit confusing.
No. Well, that instrument and these others, you're using this here in your lab in Columbus, or can these be used in the field?
Most of these are lab-based, but some of them exist in my other spaces as well. So like in Antarctica, I have an ion chromatograph instrument, and then I just bought a plate reader, which I think most people think of a plate reader as something that'll count cells. So you remember those like 96-well plates that you probably saw in biology class?
It's been a while, but I think I remember,
yeah.
Yes.
And so typically folks in the life sciences will use those to count cells in a specific type of sample. We're actually using those to look at nutrients, so phosphorus and nitrate. And the one that we just bought is basically the size of a printer. And so we're not just taking that to Antarctica, but we're taking it into the field in Antarctica. So we can then collect samples directly from streams that only flow a few weeks during the year and then analyze them right there. Because right now the issue is those labs in Antarctica that we have at the U.S. base, McMurdo Station, they're well equipped. However, we can't send a vast amount of chemicals, and we can't really set up a true geochemistry lab. Most of the time we collect these samples, they get put on a ship, and then I see them maybe 5-6 months later. And so we have to try to make sure those samples are preserved during transport. With this cute little printer-sized plate reader, we can get data almost immediately in the field, which will be really great for our new experiments.
It must be logistically difficult to do research in Antarctica. You just don't show up one day and say, "Hi, I'm here, I'm ready to do research."
It's a pretty big endeavor to even get down there. So I leave in a couple weeks, and I just got my flight itinerary, and getting down there, it's an adventure. So I fly from here to Chicago to LA to Auckland to Christchurch,
In New Zealand, yeah.
In New Zealand, yep. And so then we go through some training. We go to the CDC, which is not the Center for Disease Control, but the Clothing Distribution Center. And they give us government-issued gear. And then we hop onto a military plane. Yeah. So either a C-17 or an LC-130, those ones have skis. And then we fly down to Antarctica and hope that we don't boomerang, which means we get part of the way there and then have to turn back around and try again tomorrow.
And then when you're on site, you have to negotiate, I'm guessing, with other researchers?
So when we get on station, the U.S. Antarctic program is a well-oiled machine. We have lab spaces in McMurdo Station. It's kind of like a small mining town. It's actually on the southernmost active volcano in the world, Mount Erebus. It's active. It last had a small eruption in 2021.
Oh, okay.
Why did we build a base there? I'm not exactly sure, but hopefully we won't have a catastrophic eruption anytime soon. And so this little mining town peak season has actually about 1,000 people. Only a small fraction of them are scientists. Most of the folks in Antarctica at McMurdo Station are carpenters, janitors, cooks, mechanics, helicopter pilots, people who support ops across the continent. And then we as scientists have a set number of buildings that we can set up some labs, but we actually head out into the field. And so we do most of our research using helicopter support.
Well, I'm interested in one area of research that you conduct in astrobiology and ocean worlds. Tell us about this research.
It's still kind of crazy to me that this is where my research took me. So I'm a cryosphere scientist, which means I study icy environments, mainly Antarctica and Greenland, as you mentioned in your intro. But if it has ice and water and soil, then I'm interested, and it doesn't really matter where that is. And so when I graduated from Ohio State, I did a postdoc at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And so I had an awarded position there as a postdoc scholar. So these are semi-independent postdocs, whereas normally when you get a PhD and you do a postdoc and you are working under an advisor, the money goes through your advisor, they'll allocate maybe some budget to you. But these postdoc scholars at WHOI are actually pretty independent. And so I have more so like mentors, but I had my own research money. And so they advertise these research scholars to the department that they're now being housed in. And so I had this scientist that reached out and said, "Your cryosphere research is really interesting to me. Have you ever thought about doing ocean worlds research?" And I said, "Yes, I think that sounds really cool, but I haven't really found an opportunity to get my foot into the door." And so this colleague, his name's Chris German, he actually was one of the co-leads for the Network for Ocean Worlds that's run through NASA. And
when we say ocean worlds, what is it that we're talking about?
We're talking about moons and other planets in our solar system or beyond that have ice covers and then liquid water oceans beneath.
Like the moon, one of the moons of Jupiter. I can't remember which one. But
yeah, like Europa or Enceladus or Titan. Those are sort of our best candidates. And we're really interested in these moons because basically wherever on Earth that there's water, there's life. And if you're trying to find life in our solar system, our best candidates are probably those that currently have water or have recently had water. So there's a lot of interest in these moons because we're pretty certain they have water. Especially Enceladus. We had a mission in the late 90s, early 2000s, Cassini. It flew through a geyser that was emitting from the south pole of Enceladus. And they sampled the geyser, and it's liquid water. Like it's water on Enceladus. And that's just crazy to think about. So yeah, the Ocean Worlds community has been very much so focused on physical sciences. They don't have as much representation for geochemistry and like Earth-based cryosphere people. And so I got involved with the Network for Ocean Worlds because they said, we really want someone who can tell us the nutrient composition, think about how solutes are moving through water, how they're incorporated into ice, and then somebody who understands the cryosphere, boots on the ground.
That's super interesting to me. I'm also interested to know about the work that you're doing in Greenland. You say you work both poles, I suppose. I find the work in Greenland especially fascinating. You're looking at periodic lake drainage. Tell us more about this research.
Sure. So I'm looking at glacial lake outburst floods, or GLOFs as they've been more recently termed. And so this is when you have meltwater from a glacier that pools along the side of the glacier or is trapped by bedrock or some other boundary. And this water fills and fills and fills and then eventually catastrophically drains. These are really common in high mountain Asia as those glaciers are retreating very rapidly. When those ice dams or sediment dams fail in high mountain Asia, they've wiped out complete towns. And so there's a lot of attention on these systems as geohazards, as geologic hazards that are affecting people and infrastructure. Recently, though, attention has shifted to some respect to Greenland as the second biggest ice sheet on our planet. And an inventory showed that there are thousands of these ice marginal lakes or lakes that form along these glaciers around Greenland. And some of these catastrophic lake drainages, these gloughs, are huge, but no one has actually ever looked at the chemistry before. So I was interested in this system. I learned about it from another colleague. And what's cool about it is that every time that lake drains, so this one fills and drains every 5 to 10 years, indigenous accounts in the area indicate that there's an algal bloom. The fishermen report that their lures are covered by slime and that they can't catch halibut, which is a big economic resource for them. And so that got me thinking, well, there must be something happening there that's geochemistry. And so the work we're doing there is to sample the water, to look at the concentrations and the ratios of different nutrients, and think about how much those lake drainages might be affecting fisheries, both modernly and into the future.
Any conclusions, even tentative conclusions at this stage?
Yeah, those lakes are super nutrient rich. And so when they're filling and filling and filling, the water that's flowing underneath those glaciers is in contact with the rock. And so it's basically weathering that rock and collecting a bunch of nutrients. Now, if that water were to just slowly discharge like it normally does into the ocean, it'll stay at the bottom of the ocean. There's no light there. And so it's not going to influence carbon production from photosynthesis. Instead, though, when you store this water and you're dumping almost 2 cubic kilometers in like a week, that's like 1 million Olympic swimming pools into a small area, that completely mixes the ocean water. And now you can see that there are actually high nutrients in that water. So we're working up the results. We're hopefully going to publish them pretty soon because it's a lot. There are a lot of nutrients there.
Well, and this just shows the size of my ignorance, I suppose. You're talking about algae and you're talking about nutrients. I just wouldn't have thought this was a possibility that far north.
The polar regions have some of the highest nutrient concentrations for nitrate and phosphate. A lot of that is partially because there's no sunlight for half the year. So there's really no organisms that are using up those nutrients. And so when you seed them, when you give them a little bit more, there are organisms that are not necessarily dormant, but they're just waiting for that next like tasty morsel of rock or iron or whatever's limiting. And so when you give it to them, they bloom.
I'm interested in the metal redlining network. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, the metal redlining network started really with a scientist at Wittenberg University. And she was interested in thinking about this intersection of urban environments and geochemistry. And so in the 1940s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, they decided who would get housing loans based off of a variety of criteria. One of them was race. And so what happened is they were investing primarily in white neighborhoods and not in Black and immigrant neighborhoods. And so while this practice was abolished not that long after, sometime in the 60s or 70s, there's still traces of these racist housing practices that exist today and across Columbus. So if you look at what some would deem underserved or underdeveloped neighborhoods in Columbus, they were all redlined. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation drew red lines around those neighborhoods, and those residents could not get housing loans. And so their taxes stayed low. The city did not invest in those properties. That also means that when we were doing lead paint rebatement across the city, across the country, those neighborhoods typically did not have enough resources to strip the lead paint, take care of it in an environmentally safe way. So a lot of those houses are still painted with lead paint.
To this day?
To this day. And so what we did through this metal redlining network, we have people across 6 different states. And we went and collected samples in the drip line, so that's close to the house. Imagine basically if the paint were to shed off and fall sort of in that like near vicinity of the foundation, in the middle of the yard, and then near the road. And so we can see how the lead concentrations have potentially changed over time and which neighborhoods still have like persistent lead concentrations.
That's why the geochemist is involved in this project. What does geochemistry allow us to learn?
It allows us to make those measurements. So we are able to use an instrument like that XRF, the X-ray fluorescence, to then look at the concentrations of lead in those samples. But then it also gives us the opportunity to look at other potentially harmful metals. Is there lead? Is there cadmium, for example, that's associated? Other elements that we don't want ourselves or our children being exposed to.
Let's talk about the Girls on Rock program. What is this program? I love the title.
So the Girls on Rock program is actually part of a number of sister organizations exploring girls' expeditions. It started originally with Girls on Ice, and so it brought girls to glaciers in Alaska and has now expanded actually even into Europe. Girls on Rock is a relatively new sister program in this Inspiring Girls expedition family. And the goal is to accept girls into this program between the ages of 16 and 17, and they go into the Rocky Mountains and they learn how to rock climb in the field, which is really exciting. They learn how to backpack and how to camp. And this really started because if you look at Boy Scouts of America, Boy Scouts trains boys to do outdoor exploration. They learn how to camp. Girl Scouts is really lacking in those skills. And so when we're thinking about developing workforce and skilled individuals for our future in this country, we are not training girls in the same way that we are training boys. And so this program is really meant to address that gap, to give these girls the opportunity to learn in the environment. So their small research projects include ecology, or they might look at soil lead concentrations again, or maybe they're looking at grain size. It's just really to get them to think experimentally and through the scientific method. They also have a number of art experiences. So they learn how to journal, they learn how to write poetry, and we have a lot of opportunities for creative exploration.
On your site, since you brought this up, on your site you mentioned that you weave science and storytelling and art to broaden participation in the geosciences. How do you do this?
With a lot of creativity. So I am a member of the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos/Hispanics and Native Americans in Science. That is a huge name, and so we call it SACNAS, which actually had its National Diversity in STEM conference in Columbus this past year. So through SACNAS, I do a lot of outreach. So I host sessions thinking about how we can get more people involved in polar research to have diverse perspectives. This includes making little cartoons. We have stickers that we create. My students are amazing artists, and so they create sometimes little coloring books. I'm involved with the Bird, Polar, and Climate Research Center's education and outreach team. So we are now building a lot of virtual reality tours. So my team was just in Alaska. We're deploying a robot underneath the ice to track chemistry over the winter in Alaska. And we actually had a GoPro that we put under the water to create a 3-dimensional tour so you can see the robot and everything moving under the water. And so I think that, science is for everyone. And the way that we communicate science can be quite varied. So we can communicate science either through our publications or through national conferences and talks, but I also go to high schools and middle schools and show pictures of Antarctica or share some of these products to think about how we can make science a little bit more accessible for everyone.
What about storytelling and art in your research, not just when you're doing outreach or working with students?
I focus on storytelling from that's focused on my identity. So I am Caribbean American. My dad's Dominican, my mom's Puerto Rican, and I'm a first-generation college student. So when I was 6 years old, could have never really imagined myself working in Antarctica. I always loved snow and ice. I grew up in Massachusetts, and gosh, does it snow there. I also went to school in upstate New York. I've never known cold like that before. And I sort of serendipitously ended up in this situation. You know, we think about life and sometimes windows and doors open and close, and I found myself just really scanning the landscape and thinking about which windows or doors are now open that might seem interesting. I could have done probably 20 other things that would have been just as cool. I could have been a real estate lawyer. I have no idea. That sounds like it could be fun. But this track that I found myself on was really enjoyable. And so that storytelling aspect, it's not just talking about the data, but incorporating ourselves into science. My identity is really important to me. I wear sometimes traditional earrings or jewelry when I'm in the field. Earrings are kind of my thing. And actually, so my coloring page through Bird Polar, I made sure that there are some big earrings in there because I love them. And I think that finding ways to express yourself in the field is important.
Why ice? Why the focus on ice?
The last graduation for myself that I have ever attended was high school graduation. When I graduated my undergrad, which was a big deal for my family, I'm the only person who has a bachelor's degree or a master's or a PhD now. And I had the opportunity to go to Greenland. And I said, Mom, I'm going to Greenland. That was the first time I had a passport. I had to go and get a passport. I had only been on, I think, 3 plane rides in my life. And here I was on a C-130 landing at Summit Station in Greenland in the middle of the ice. And that field season was really difficult. It was cold. I landed and it was minus 56. Doesn't matter if it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, that's cold. We slept in tents outside, and I loved it. One of the things I thought was so cool in that environment is that you could look at this landscape, and it was so pristine. And so the science that we could do there, we could answer questions that you can't answer anywhere else in the world because this environment is basically untouched. And that really intrigued me. I love basic science. I love applied science too, but basic science really advances our fundamental understanding of how the Earth works. And the polar regions are some of the only places that we can do like the most impactful, in my opinion, basic science.
As you look over the field, geochemistry as a field, what have been the biggest changes that have taken place, say, over the last, 40 or 50 years?
I think it's become a lot more interdisciplinary, geosciences over time and geochemistry. Before, we used to go out into the field, collect a few samples, and say, oh, this is the strontium concentration of this sample, which means that that's it. Those are the data. But now, I'm not an ecologist, but I work with a team of ecologists. I'm not an engineer. I work with teams of engineers. And I feel that over time, we now have these amazing interdisciplinary and collaborative teams, and we can answer really hard questions because we have so much expertise coming from the outside too. So not only are we advancing now with collaboration our analytical techniques, we can make way better measurements at higher resolution, lower concentrations, more complicated like sample matrices, so what's the background of those samples, than we've ever been before. And that has really changed our fundamental understanding of basically how the world works.
That's very interesting. Usually when I ask that question, it's some sort of technology that's changed the way that we do our field. And you're saying it's a sort of an intellectual change. Totally.
Yeah, so like with the work that I'm doing, it's the long-term ecological research project in Antarctica. So I'm a co-PI in this project. I'm the only geochemist PI. And so the ecologists will come to me and they say, hey, Melisa, we could only find this one species of worm in this soil, but then we couldn't find it in another one. Can you help us find out why? And so I'll say, well, this soil has this concentration of salinity, or it's this age, or it's been this number of years since it last had water on it. And so then it allows us to think about how these extreme environments can harbor life. And these are questions that I don't think we could have ever thought to answer even 25 years ago. But I see science becoming so much more collaborative and interdisciplinary, and this is the future for it. And that's the biggest change that I've seen.
Is it common for earth scientists to work in both Antarctica and the Arctic?
I'd say it's common for some of us. It's not entirely common. Usually people pick one region. NSF manages all the U.S. Antarctic bases. It's a little bit easier logistically to get to the Arctic. I can take a commercial flight to Utqiagvik, Alaska, the highest, most settlement in Alaska. You can't take a commercial flight to Antarctica. So I find that people are interested in process. If they're interested in glacial dynamics, maybe they'll look at both, but typically it's one or the other. I'm sort of one of those strange people that says, I'm ice agnostic. I don't care if it's in an ice cave in Slovenia, a glacier in Pakistan, ice in Columbus or the Arctic, or on Enceladus or Europa. In Antarctica, as long as there's ice and water and sediment, I'm happy.
Tell us what you're working on now. What's the next project for your lab?
I have a lot of projects going on. So I'm an assistant professor. I'm in my this is the start of my 4th year of being a professor. So my group is active. I currently have 3 graduate students, 2 postdocs, 3 undergrads, and a lab manager. It's kind of a lot. And everyone's doing such amazing and cool stuff. So we just got word, hopefully we're expecting a press release soon. We have a NASA ICAR. It's a program focused on astrobiology research that was selected. And so this will fund us for the next 5 years to look at how organics are preserved and transferred through ice on ocean worlds in our solar system. So this is a big multi-million-dollar project that just was selected from NASA. I think we're one of 3. So we're looking into that realm. I have a graduate student who is doing more urban work. So she is trying to understand how drought in Ohio has affected stream chemistry and whether watersheds, so landscapes that have been managed by people, are more resilient or less resilient. How long does it take for those landscapes to rebound, basically, from drought? And so we have this really amazing data set from an agricultural watershed in Coshocton, and then she'll be collecting samples here in Columbus. The drought here has gotten pretty bad the last few years, and so I think this will be really important for farmers and residents in Ohio. And then we have another project where we're looking at whether we actually have to drill through the ice on ocean worlds to understand its chemistry. So the surface of these ocean worlds, it's bombarded, it's getting a lot of radiation from Jupiter or from the sun, and it's really hard to drill through ice. Some of the ice shells on these moons are like 10 to 25 kilometers thick. But do you actually have to get there to understand what's beneath? And so what we're doing is we're looking at sea ice on Earth and trying to see whether hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the sea floor, whether those signatures are captured in ice.
Melisa Diaz, thank you.
Thanks.
Voices of Excellence is produced and recorded at the Ohio State University College of Arts and Sciences Marketing and Communications Studio. More information about the podcast and our guests can be found at go.osu.edu/voices. Voices of Excellence is produced by Doug Dangler. I'm Jen Farmer.